From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and here's what's coming up. Out of Iowa State University, Lee Schulz provides this week's analysis of the cattle markets. He has the latest on domestic beef demand, which continues to be robust, and Lee shares the new USDA numbers on U.S. beef exports and cattle imports. Then K-State's Dale Blasi will discuss the results of his recent research on using high-energy fiber-based feedstuffs as a receiving ration for stocker cattle. He says this approach is showing great merit in improving feed consumption and conversion efficiency. Later on, Sarah Moyer brings this week's 4-H segment. She'll talk with K-State's Michelle Beran about the 4-H Spin Club initiative here in Kansas. All that and more right here on Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
And our first offering is on the cattle market trends of late. And for more insight on that, we turn now to a livestock economist out of Iowa State University, Lee Schulz. Lee, we're taking up this topic with a bit of positive to the markets this past week. We did see the cash-fed trade climb ever so slightly.
We have. I think the undertone's a bit better than we expected, especially as we've seen markets close down on Monday, but fairly supportive. And to put it in a bit of context, if we look at year-ago prices were about $1 per pound, $1 per hundredweight, so we're well above that on the October contract. We've seen lows for the year, mid-October last year, below $1 at about $97 per hundredweight, well above that. So I think there's still a positive tone in this market compared to relative levels we've seen of past.
And as a matter of fact, this market, and we've thought this for a time, but seems to have found that floor and, in fact, is not likely to slip below that dollar mark again.
I think that's the case. We've seen really largest slaughter of the year in September, if you look at it from a monthly basis, largest September kill since 2010, and pretty supportive prices. I think really points to the demand situation with these larger supplies.
Talk a bit, if you would, about what's going on the futures trade as well. You've noted that there are some interesting relationships there that producers might, as a matter of fact, take advantage of.
Well, I've been staring at the spreads between futures contracts. If you look at October compared to December, it's about $6 spread. And then if you get even out into the spring contracts, that spread is much larger. I think that's showing some opportunities for producers, especially when you look at forward contracts. Right now, as you look at those spring contracts, some of those basis offerings are $7 over. So pretty strong basis. Now, it is a little bit lower than we've seen a year ago when we've seen about $12 basis in March. But even at that $7, and given futures prices what they were for that April contract on Friday, you're looking at almost 130 prices as a possible point to lock in. I think that is locking in break even or slightly better. So there is a little bit of risk seeing what we've seen historical basis, or at least basis last year. But those positive basis numbers, I think, are opportunities for producers.
Is there room to be aggressive here, do you think, then? Again, the straightforward returns to feeding cattle are not great, in fact, in the red for many producers. So do you think this is an opportunity that one should jump all over?
I think at least protecting some of those sales. You know, if you look at current placements, just using straight futures contracts and a historical basis, we are pretty close to break even. I think it'll depend on your cost of production. So this is really one way to get a little bit above that break even, because that basis estimate that packers are currently offering as we go into March is better than historical. And so I think there is some opportunity there, maybe not putting all your eggs in one basket, but at least protecting some of those future sales.
All right. Before we talk of the market drivers that we find in the trade right now, the feeder cattle market this past week, how did it trend?
A little bit of a roller coaster. We did see it trend upward. I think if there's ever an October feeder market that's been strong, it's happening right now. A little bit of counter seasonally. I think we've seen some pretty strong feeder cattle prices. That has supported value of gain proposition, backgrounding calves. We've seen that support. On the flip side, we've seen a little bit of steady to lower for the calf market. Again, but that's also pointing to a buying opportunity for stocker producers or a retained ownership for cow-calf producers.
So the tone of it sounds like this feeder market may cool down some in the weeks ahead. Is that your expectation?
I think it will a bit, especially when you look at the receipts of auction markets. We've seen about 60,000 more receipts last week than we did the week before. So I think just given the supply levels that are going to be coming on the market, that's going to really put some pressure on the prices. How much, I think, still a little bit debatable because we've seen relative support in that market. But just from those larger supplies, I think that's going to really push a little bit on the market.
Well, we want to, of course, address the latest on beef demand, starting with the domestic scene. It's been so impressive just how much beef is moving as of late, and there was nothing happening last week that deterred that at all, was there?
No, it wasn't. If you look at the choice cutout, we were up about 60 cents. If you look at average over average, we're up about $1.50 from each week. So I think we've seen these larger supplies, but really there have been supportive prices. Consumers have been willing to pay that, and that's really reflective in what we've seen from the cutout prices. Margins are still pretty strong for packers, so I think they are still willing to pay up for those cash cattle.
So it's, again, a situation that is very favorable for the cattle market, and we're glad to see it continue week after week. The latest USDA numbers on beef imports and exports have been posted now, and we've been very encouraged for a time about the export numbers in particular. What does this latest round of numbers have to say, Lee?
It keeps the positive tone. If you look, the data is through August 2017. If you compare that August 2017 to August 2016, exports in total are up 15%. And then looking year to date, also up 15%. The real star market has been Japan, up 28% year to date. But also, you have to go down pretty far into the countries that we export before you see a year-over-year decrease, actually all the way down to Bahamas before you see an 8% year-over-year decrease. Otherwise, all of those countries are importing more U.S. beef than they did a year ago. Also supportive of these markets, beef imports are down to the tune of about 3%. Most of that decline has come from Australia. The U.S. importing less lean beef from Australia than they did a year ago.
And on the import side, you say that largely consists of feeder cattle being brought in from Mexico, correct?
It does, and we've seen that up slightly for the year, 4% increase, but that was very much front-loaded the beginning of 2017. And so the number increase is about 44,000 head year-to-date compared to year-ago levels, so not much of an impact, I think, when you look at our shear cattle numbers.
Back on the export side, U.S. beef is moving in markets abroad. There doesn't seem to be anything out there that will impede that or slow that down, Lee.
You know, when you look at beef prices, they are very competitive in the export market as well as our domestic market. So I think that is very much helping beef being traded. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think short term there isn't much likely to impact these markets. Longer term, you know, we're always looking at value of the U.S. dollar and how trade agreements could potentially impact these markets.
Those are certainly wild cards where we're headed with our trade deals, which we've talked of quite a bit of late. Do want to finish on one further thing, and that is the latest USDA quarterly hogs and pigs report. A week ago, this past Friday, those new numbers were released, and they indicated an abundance of hogs out there as a competing meat with beef. So what is your take on the importance of those numbers to the beef sector?
Well, I think first and foremost, when you look at the hog market and the availability of pork, wasn't much unexpected in that report, understanding that when we looked at coming into this year, likely record supplies of pork. So I think most of this impact is already priced into the market, realizing that pork is very competitive when we look at it from a price standpoint because of the availability. But also, I think it's important to look really across prices. And when we look at retail prices, they've all really maintained relative to year-ago levels with larger supplies of pork, beef, poultry, really any red meat or poultry that you look at. So that really does point to the demand situation, both domestically and from the export market. A lot of this increased production, be it pork or beef, has gone to the export markets. I think that's helped really support prices in the U.S. and been relative supportive of the whole market when we look at cattle or pork. So
really, across the board, the red meat scene is doing well, to put it so succinctly.
Yep. And I think really fourth quarter will help give us a barometer here as record supplies of pork are coming online and will continue to come online throughout the remainder of the year. Beef slaughter has really ramped up. So this will really give us a barometer of our ability to move these products and the demand situation out there.
And lastly, as you look at the trading week ahead, both the Fed and feeder markets seem to be on decent, if not good, footing at the moment, and that will likely continue.
I think there has been some momentum set here, especially as we've seen the trade this last week. The one thing I'm really watching are when packers start to pull on some of those contracts, especially for October. I don't think we've seen much of that last week, and so that potentially could pressure the October contract. But also, as you look out there, there's some pretty large premiums as you get on those deferred contracts that will be supportive of the whole market complex.
Lee, as always, we appreciate your insight on these markets, and we'll catch up with you again soon. Many thanks for your time right here.
Thank you.
He's out of Iowa State University, a livestock economist there. That's Lee Schulz. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll be back in a moment on this, the K-State Radio Network. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. We're back now on the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. We're going to take a look at new research out of K-State's Animal Sciences and Industry Department, and it was exploring possible new dietary adjustments for stocker calves after they come off of grass. Joining us once again is beef cattle specialist Dale Blasi of K-State Research and Extension. He was the principal investigator in this research work. And you're looking at these receiving rations for stockers as they would come off summer pasture and head into the dry lot in the fall. And benefits to hiking the energy content of that ration. Explain, if you would, Dale.
Well, that's right, Eric. We conducted a series of 5 different studies throughout last year looking at the whole issue of program feeding and using, rather than a digestible energy source like corn, we relied on 40% of the dry matter from either corn gluten feed or wet corn distillers. And what we found basically is that a producer is able to get by with once-a-day feeding, and if you target at about 2.2% body weight, you're going to hit right at about 2.25 pounds of gain. And there's so many advantages to that in terms of reduced feed waste. You're able to actually dial in exactly, you feed accordingly to the animal's weight. So in terms of efficiencies from various rations that have to be mixed as you bring cattle closer up on feed, we evaluated the health aspects too, because we were very concerned about using a diet that basically was 60 NEG, 60 megacows of NEG. And typically, growing diets are somewhere in the ballpark of 50, 54 NEG, but we pushed it closer to 60. And everything, the parameters, the haptoglobins, everything that would suggest we were creating any stress in the calves simply was not there.
Now, you used a specific ration here, wet corn gluten, on a dry matter basis. Why did you choose that particular feedstuff?
Well, it's such that the soluble fiber in a co-product, be it distiller's grains or corn gluten feed, it's very digestible. It's very rumen-friendly, as opposed to the lower pHs one would see with higher starch-containing feedstuffs, be it corn or even milo if it was processed. You just don't see those pH swings that can create potential subclinical acidosis episodes. Mm-hmm. And so by feeding calves a higher energy with the energy source being a soluble fiber, we're able to basically reduce the amount of dry matter that is delivered to that calf. And the other plus side of it is these calves have been they're acclimated to that 60 NEG diet, and they're only 1 or 2 steps away from actually going on a full-fed feedlot diet. So they've been primed, if you will. The rumen has been primed. It's a matter of just bringing them up on full feed and gradually increasing the density of the energy of the diet as you're going to go to a full-fledged feedlot finishing diet. So those calves are programmed to it. The other plus side, on the other side of the coin, we saw an improvement of efficiency with these diets of 27%. Right. That is huge compared to a full-fed diet. And I might add, we certainly didn't invent the whole concept of limit feeding and certainly program feeding, which is what it's also referred to. We refined it. We utilized the higher digestible fiber, and we pushed the energy frontier up to 60 NEG. And I might add that over the course of the year that we did these studies, we received heifers from Florida, we received steers out of Texas, out of Montana, and also Tennessee for that matter. Many of the southeastern auction markets we pulled calves in. So
these were long-hauled cattle.
Long-hauled cattle, and basically the way the diet works is on arrival you provide long stem hay as one normally would, but guess what? The very next day they're on that 60 NEG diet at about 1% of body weight. In many cases, that may be more than enough because intakes of calves newly arrived are typically depressed, and it takes a while to adapt to their new surroundings and start to get their way back about them. But you gradually bring those cattle up, and you have a slick bunk. You feed them once a day, 2.2% of their weight. So, a 5-weight, 6-weight calf, you're looking at just a notch over 13, 14 pounds of dry matter, and they're cleaning it up. And we've seen bunks cleaned up in the space of less than 2 hours, and those bunks are clean, and those calves are not fed until the very next day.
And do they have access still to long-stemmed hay?
No long-stemmed hay. It's a complete TMR. Now, the diet composition, we alluded to 40% of a co-product being a wet distillers, and we actually compared a wet distillers to a sweet brand, which comes out of Blair, Nebraska. But many producers don't have the transportation radius to justify the economic haul of that higher moisture material. So one of our final studies was actually doing a head-to-head comparison with a wet distiller's grains. Bottom end is we were able to see comparable performances. So producers in central Kansas, western Kansas, with ready access to wet distiller's grains, there's a great opportunity for that as well. So 40% of a co-product, wet corn gluten feed, wet distillers, 30% corn, and about 15% total in roughage. Now, bear in mind, as I said, we still have a lot of the soluble fiber in the co-products. Mm-hmm. So we're not really limiting the cattle, the rumen function, as we would probably experience with a calf that's in a full finished diet. But the consistency of performance, and what is required is you got to have a good, accurate weight of these calves. One thing we did during the course of our studies was to weigh the calves on almost a weekly basis. So we were able to adjust increasing weights of the calves and then provide the amounts of the diet more accurately to accommodate their growing performance. Mm-hmm. So knowing the weight of the calves and making sure you have ample bunk space. The other thing that my guys have observed with this feeding is that when the dinner bell rings, I would imagine it to be much like an Army mess hall where The Army conscripts have 15 minutes to eat and then they get on with their business. A full-fed diet would be more like an all-night buffet where calves get up and go to the bunk as their appetite directs them. So from a health management, from a health detection perspective, my folks really think there's a lot to be said about having all the calves, if they're really truly interested in eating in the morning, they'll show up at the bunk, and that'll greatly help itself in terms of detecting a calf that might be mildly ill.
You note the 27% gain in efficiency, but that's much more than just reduced wastage of feed, it sounds.
It's reduced wastage in feed. It's the fact of limit-fed diets is that limit feeding slows down the rate of passage in the gut. And so the feed particles that are in the small intestine and so forth reside longer, and so the body has a greater opportunity for extracting out the digestibility. And in fact, our digestibility study suggested about a 15% in digestibility. And that's where we're getting it at. Okay. On the other side of the coin, where we're seeing great value from an environmental perspective, there's less manure being produced. And that's a huge consideration for many of our growing facilities in terms of managing the manure production and how they get rid of it. You feed these calves very efficiently, you have a concomitant reduction in manure production coming out because there's a greater extraction of the nutrients that are passing through the tract.
And gains are not compromised whatsoever.
Gains are not compromised. And the beautiful thing, you tied this up with a website from the Ag Econ boys, beefbasis.com, and you can dial in performance. You know what your costs are. We've seen a savings of almost $3 to $4 per animal over a 60-day period of time. The savings are there all the way around. You look at reduced times to run your wagon. If you're carrying a more concentrated mix on that wagon, you're not messing with roughage. And roughage is a major headache and expense at any backgrounding, any receiving facility, and certainly in a feedlot environment. We're very excited about this program. In fact, we're going to be kicking a trial off here in 2 weeks involving some animal health issues with the vet school, and we're going to utilize this same diet with cutting bulls and steer counterparts. And so we'll have some more observations on the success of this particular feeding strategy.
Will you also likewise be tracking the progress of these calves and seeing if there's a subsequent impact on their finishing performance? You
know, fortunately, everything we receive, we work very closely with a commercial feed yard that collaborates with our stocker unit, and we have installed electronic ID tags in the calves. And so when those calves are shipped to the commercial yard and then subsequently are going to the harvest point, we'll be able to collect all the carcass data back. And yes, that in fact is on our plate to look at the long-term consequences. The other side of the coin is I've talked to my great colleague, Dr. Glenn Tonser over at Ag Econ, and we're just looking for the right graduate student to really tear into the ag economic aspects of this to try to put a bow around this entire concept that's been around for a number of years.
Well, this idea has great promise, it would seem, in, as a matter of fact, using high-energy, digestible fiber diets for receiving rations for calves coming off of grass, and it's been tested out successfully here at K-State. Dale, thanks for the roundup on this work. Looking forward to hearing more about it in the near future.
Thank you, Eric.
Dale Blasi is a beef cattle specialist, K-State Research and Extension. And we'll be back with more after this break. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is the K-State Radio Network, and you're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Next up for you, today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. A group funded by the Humane Society of the United States has asked the USDA to launch an investigation into efforts in Oklahoma to establish a statewide beef checkoff program there. That's according to a complaint filed last week. The Organization for Competitive Markets, which has pressed the USDA to take steps to better control federal checkoff programs as a whole, has called on the agency to audit the checkoff in Oklahoma. The OCM alleges that the Oklahoma Beef Council has illegally become involved with the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association in promoting a yes vote on the proposed dollar state checkoff program by using the federal checkoff logo on a website and Facebook page. The proposed Oklahoma checkoff is set for November 1st vote. The Oklahoma Beef Council said in a statement it is not involved nor has it funded the Vote Yes Beef Checkoff referendum process in Oklahoma, led by a coalition of Oklahoma beef and agricultural organizations. In addition, the OCM is requesting a complete audit in light of a recent $2.6 million theft from the federal program by a former employee who pled guilty on a variety of charges. The Oklahoma Beef Council acknowledged that theft and addressed the concerns about the upcoming vote. It said that in July of 2016, the council had discovered one of its employees had committed fraud against the OBC and its board of directors, employees, and constituents. The council said it continues to work to recover those lost funds. The council went on to say that they have already taken steps to ensure the integrity of the beef checkoff in Oklahoma and a greater level of accountability generally. If Oklahoma producers vote for the checkoff, it would become the 16th state to implement a $1 state checkoff. The federal program requires 50 cents of every dollar collected to be sent to the Cattlemen's Beef Promotion and Research Board for programs. The $1 Oklahoma assessment would be managed by state producers and would be refundable. Forecasts for corn and soybean crop production have been all over the place this season. History proves, though, that the upcoming USDA October forecasts are usually very accurate. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
The next USDA forecast for this season's crop production is coming out shortly, October 12th, this coming Thursday.
Folks are eagerly awaiting the updated forecast to see has anything changed since last month.
Lance Honig with USDA's Statistics Service. That answer we don't have, but we will have shortly. All the result of a massive data collection effort that started the last week of September. USDA surveying thousands of farmers for their take on what their yields will be, and USDA experts have been out evaluating field plots, the same ones they checked for the September crop report.
Nearly 5,000 plots for corn, cotton, and soybeans, 1,920 samples for corn, 1,835 for soybeans, 1,197 for cotton. And for each of those sample counts I just gave you, we lay out 2 units within that field. So you really can double those counts in terms of how many plots we're visiting month after month.
Enumerators have been taking measurements of crops on those plots, also sending crop samples to the USDA lab in St. Louis. The chairman of USDA's Outlook Board, Seth Meyer, says it's his experience the October numbers are likely to be very close to what actually is going to be harvested, especially for corn.
The crop's reaching maturity, harvest is underway, the farmers have a better idea of what's there, and you've got lab observations, and so that's why we tend by October to have a yield for corn that doesn't change much at that point. It's not to say it can't change after October, but October is usually the month where it really locks down, and from that point forward, changes tend to be very modest.
And indeed, for corn, the September forecast over the last 20 years has missed the actual harvest number by an average of 271 million bushels. The October forecast missing the mark, an average of only 148. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
And the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative needs to pivot away from renegotiation to inking new trade deals, according to a joint statement issued by U.S. Wheat Associates and the National Association of Wheat Growers. While not objecting in principle to updating NAFTA, the groups are pointing out that the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement is barely 1 quarter through full implementation, the groups note. They also weighed against pulling out of that trade deal, as was threatened recently by President Trump. USTR should get past plowing the same fields and start opening grounds in new markets, according to NOG CEO Chandler Gould. Now on to this week's edition of Tree Tales with K-State Forester Bob Atchison. Bob?
Successful management of Kansas woodlands requires hard work, forestry expertise, and some financial investment. Fortunately, Kansas is home to some excellent forestry contractors that can help farmers, ranchers, and other landowners with their forestry projects. Why hire a forestry contractor in the first place? As a woodlot or windbreak owner, you need to ask yourself if you have the necessary skills, equipment, and time to undertake the work properly. Forestry projects often involve hard labor and expertise, and it may be in the best interests of all involved to seek the advice and services of a qualified contractor. Cost-share programs such as the Environmental Quality Incentives Program for Forest Land Health can cover the majority of costs associated with hiring contractors. Another advantage of hiring a contractor is generally more acres of woodlands and windbreaks can be managed than the average landowner can accomplish on their own. Kansas Forest Service encourages landowners to hire contractors with good insurance coverage and to have a solid contract in place regarding the work to be accomplished. A typical contract should consider the following information: location and description of the property, services to be performed, the time frame in which they will be delivered, a good list or plan including recommendation, advice, or reports that describe the work including timber inventories. Responsibility for who determines and marks property or project boundaries is important, along with assurances that the forest contractor meets all legal requirements for the work to be performed. Workmen's compensation, liability protection, and other labor and safety laws should be considered for anyone working on your property. Contract performance and quality standards should be spelled out in the contract, including penalties for failure to meet them. Any necessary monitoring for project success should be included and, of course, the amount you agree to pay, along with the schedule for payment. Last but not least are the signatures from both parties. A list of forestry contractors is available on the Kansas Forest Service website at www.kansasforest.org or by calling our state office at 785-532-3310. This is Bob Atchison with the Kansas Forest Service, encouraging you to consider hiring a professional to care for the woodlands and windbreaks on your property. You've been listening to another Tree Tale.
Thanks, Bob. And this is Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
We're back on Agriculture Today. I'm Sarah Moyer, here for our weekly 4-H segment. This time we're focusing on the result of an expansion grant and the newly formed SPIN clubs across Kansas. SPIN standing for Special Interest, and we'll learn more about those here in a moment with our guest from the Midway District. We now have Michelle Beran, a 4-H youth and development agent in that district. It's good to have you on, Michelle.
Thank you, Sarah.
While 4-H is popular in many communities in Kansas, there are some areas where youth are less exposed to the 4-H program and its opportunities. Michelle, would you briefly summarize the goal of the expansion grant and how that's being put into place in the communities?
Certainly. As you can tell from its name, the focus of this was really to expand the exposure of 4-H through additional opportunities and vehicles, and one of those was the SPIN Club. So it's a really important part of that. SPIN, S-P-I-N, stands for Special Interest Club, and it may focus on a specific project area, or it may be a series of classes that are related together for 6 hours total of instruction.
And the members of the SPIN clubs, they are enrolled in 4-H, correct?
They are considered 4-H members, that is correct. It is very different than the traditional community club model, but we do consider those SPIN club members 4-Hers through and through. Really, it's just an opportunity to share the benefits and the advantages of 4-H with a group that might not even consider 4-H because they're not aware of the time and commitment and those kind of things. While a lot of spin clubs stand on their own, we also always look at those as an opportunity to recruit and talk to them about joining traditional community clubs as a step off from that spin club.
And you mentioned 6 hours of instruction being the critical piece of learning for the members who are involved with these spin clubs. Would you give an example or explain how that might be structured?
Absolutely. It can be done in a variety of ways. That could be 1 hour a week. Say in an after-school program, it could be a full Saturday with a full 6 hours. It might be divided up over 2 Saturdays, perhaps 2 Saturday mornings with 3 hours on each Saturday morning. But the goal really is 6 full hours of concentrated instruction time with the youth.
What types of elements of a traditional 4-H program are then incorporated into this spin club, this modified type of club?
Well, an important part of it is that we will always utilize our 4-H pledge. That really talks about our core values, and so it is something that is utilized whether it's a spin club or a traditional community club. That's an important element to really keep that consistency across the board. For instance, I had a particular spin club that we did this summer, and one of the things that we did was to each week during our lesson to tie that lesson back into at least one of the 4 H's of head, heart, hands, and health.
Excellent. And so that, again, has an introduction to some of the 4-H values and characteristics of the program that people are familiar with. Michelle, the volunteer opportunities that also come with spin clubs are available to people who are familiar or not familiar with 4-H as well, right?
That is correct. We're always looking for volunteers in any avenue. We do, however, for somebody to do a spin club, we would need for them to be a registered volunteer because they're working with youth, because they are representing our Kansas 4-H program. We certainly would want to be sure that they are a registered volunteer, but it is a great way for somebody who has perhaps a few hours rather than the time to do a monthly club meeting, but maybe has a few hours every summer that they could dedicate to a spin club. This is an excellent way for them to get some volunteer time in and really contribute to the life skills of young people in their community.
How often are these clubs occurring?
It really depends entirely upon the district or the county and what else is going on. Some of these end up working out as regular after-school programs, and they may continue on much, much longer than a 6-week or a 6-hour time frame as it works out. For some others, that 6 hours is going to be the total of what they work out. But there are spin clubs occurring across the state in all of our counties and districts through our 4-H program.
And to hear about the spin clubs that are locally going on for our listeners, they would contact their local extension office, correct?
Absolutely, and they would be able to get them connected with some things that are happening in their area.
Will the members of these spin clubs be expected to pay the 4-H fee?
They do not at this point. That's not to say that that wouldn't ever happen, but at this point it is not a part of that because it is short-term. Often we can gather, this was obviously some expansion grant funds paid for that, but there are often other grants available that we can utilize it to cover some minimal costs or find some local sponsors who are willing to help out because they understand the value of these programs.
Excellent. Well, Michelle, as this program has been evolving, when it first started out, is this what the Kansas 4-H program had envisioned?
As far as I'm aware, it is. Again, their goal was really to expand the exposure of 4-H, and anywhere that we can add that, whether that's an after-school program, whether that's a Saturday program, those are all things that help us achieve that goal. In particular, the one that I worked with this summer at our local library, nearly all of the young people who attended were not traditional 4-H members. And so it was great to see them then at our county fair come by and check things out, ask some questions, have some interest in furthering their understanding of 4-H principles and what 4-H can really bring to their leadership and life skills.
An exciting outreach program to be hearing about these spin clubs across the state of Kansas, as Michelle mentioned. Anything else you'd like to add about the program?
I don't think so. It was an awesome opportunity to be able to work with. We really appreciated the funding by the foundation for these dollars. Just anywhere that, again, we can get that exposure to our 4-H values and life skills out there is a very good thing.
Well, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
That was 4-H Youth and Development Agent for the Midway District, Michelle Beran. Again, to learn more about spin clubs in your area, you can contact your local extension office. Spin clubs are a special interest group club that is being funded by an expansion grant awarded to the Kansas 4-H program. So looking to attract youth that may not normally join 4-H, and the program has been off and running, especially with some summer programs going on this past summer season. We enjoy this weekly opportunity to highlight the Kansas 4-H program, and if you'd like to learn more about its mission and other activities going on throughout the state, please do visit kansas4-h.org. That is the website for the program. With that, we are out of time for today, but we'll be back the rest of this week with more. Thanks for tuning in. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Sarah Moyer, and you've been listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.